Antonelli's Monaco pole may have just turned into Mercedes' biggest problem. The lap was legal. The time stood. The result was official. But inside the paddock, nobody is treating it like a normal pole position. Because Mercedes were supposed to be slower after the FIA stepped in. The hot engine loophole was supposed to be closed. The emergency qualifying trick was supposed to be banned. The front wing questions were supposed to be behind them. Then Antonelli crossed the line. Pole position. By 43 thousandths of a second. And suddenly, the scariest question in Formula One was not, did Mercedes get caught? It was, what if they only got caught with the easiest trick to find? Because behind this one lap, there is a reported 0.3 per lap engine advantage, a hot temperature test at 130 degrees Celsius, a front wing investigation, a hybrid shutdown exploit, and a 19-year-old driver who still made Monaco look effortless. The FIA may have closed the loophole. But Antonelli's pole made the controversy explode. Because if Mercedes are still this fast after the clampdown, then the real secret may not be one illegal part. It may be the whole car. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why Antonelli's Monaco pole hit the paddock like a shockwave, you have to start before Monaco. Because this was not the first time Mercedes had been questioned. It was only the moment when all the questions became impossible to ignore. For weeks, the same feeling had been spreading through Formula One. Mercedes were fast, but not just fast in the normal way. They were fast in a way that made rival teams uncomfortable. The car did not seem to have one obvious strength. It seemed to have answers everywhere. On power. On balance. On energy. On braking stability. On qualifying performance. And when a car looks strong in too many different places, the paddock stops admiring it and starts dissecting it. That is exactly what happened with the Mercedes W17. Kimi Antonelli was not simply having a good season. He was leading the Drivers' Championship at 19 years old. George Russell was second. Mercedes were leading the Constructors' Championship. And that kind of dominance, in a brand new regulation era, never stays innocent for long. Because Formula One teams do not believe in accidents. They believe in causes. If a car is faster, something is making it faster. If it keeps winning, something is feeding that advantage. If both drivers are near the front, weekend after weekend, then the answer is not luck. It is hidden somewhere in the machine. And the first place everyone looked was the engine. That is where the Mercedes controversy began to take shape. Not with a dramatic disqualification. Not with a smoking piece of illegal hardware. But with a much more dangerous idea. A rule that may have been written one way, measured another way, and exploited in the tiny space between the two. The issue was compression ratio. It sounds technical, but it is actually easy to understand. Inside an engine, air and fuel are squeezed before they burn. The tighter that mixture is squeezed, the more powerful the explosion can become. Think of it like pressing down on a spring. Press it softly, and it barely jumps back. Press it hard, and the release is much stronger. That squeeze matters. So the rules put a limit on it. The maximum compression ratio was 16:1. But here is the problem. According to the controversy, that limit was originally checked when the engine was cold, sitting in the pit lane, at ambient temperature. A clean test. A controlled test. A test that makes sense, until you remember one brutal fact. A Formula One engine does not race cold. It races hot. It races under stress. It races while the entire car is shaking, breathing, expanding, and fighting physics at impossible speed. And when an engine gets hot, materials can change shape. Tiny gaps can shift. Components can expand just enough to make a difference. That difference is where the Mercedes suspicion lived. Rivals believed Mercedes had found a way for the engine to measure legally when cold, but behave more aggressively when hot. In the garage, the car could appear inside the limit. On track, once temperature built up, it allegedly produced the effect of a higher compression ratio. That is why the story became so explosive. Because this was not about a visible part anyone could point at. It was about transformation. The car that passed the check might not have been the exact same car, in performance terms, that raced at full temperature. And in Formula One, that is a nightmare for rivals. Because how do you fight something that only fully appears when the car is alive? You can protest a wing you can see. You can copy a floor edge you can photograph. You can study a suspension movement on video. But an engine behavior that changes with temperature is harder, quieter, and much more political. The reported performance gain was massive. Up to 0.3 of a second per lap. 0.3 does not sound huge to normal people. In Formula One, it is enormous. It can change qualifying. It can change tire life. It can change strategy. It can make a driver look calmer because the car does not need to be pushed beyond its limit every lap. And then Monaco made that number even more dramatic. Antonelli took pole by 43 thousandths. Less than a blink. Less than a breath. A margin so small that one tiny lift, one slight correction, one fractionally late throttle application could have erased it. So when rivals connected those two ideas, the suspicion became impossible to avoid. A controversial advantage reportedly worth up to 3/10. A Monaco pole decided by 43 thousandths. A Mercedes car still at the front after months of questions. That is why the paddock was not treating this like a normal qualifying result. But then came the twist that made everything more confusing. The FIA had already acted. The governing body introduced a new way to check the engine. It would not only be measured cold anymore. It would also be assessed at a representative operating temperature of 130 degrees Celsius. In plain English, the FIA stopped asking, "What does this engine look like when it is resting?" It started asking, "What does this engine become when it is working?" That was supposed to close the door. That was supposed to remove the controversial thermal advantage. That was supposed to show whether Mercedes were genuinely ahead, or whether their early dominance had been helped by a loophole the sport had not caught quickly enough. And that is why Monaco became more than a race weekend. It became a test of truth. Every rival wanted to see the same thing. Would Mercedes finally drop back? Would Antonelli suddenly look less untouchable? Would Russell lose the calm control that had made Mercedes so powerful in the championship? Would the car that had looked dominant for weeks finally become ordinary once the alleged trick was taken away? That was the expectation. And then Antonelli ruined it. He did not collapse under the pressure. He did not look exposed. He did not give the paddock the easy answer it wanted. He put the car on pole. At Monaco. After the clampdown. That is why the controversy exploded instead of fading. Because if Mercedes had fallen backwards, the story would have been simple. The advantage was the loophole. The FIA closed it. The field caught up. But Mercedes did not fall backwards. And that forced everyone to face a much more uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the loophole was real, but not the whole story. Maybe the engine trick was only one layer of a wider Mercedes advantage. Maybe the real reason this car is so fast is not hiding in one system, but spread across the entire machine. That is the part rivals fear most. Because a single loophole can be banned. A test can be changed. A directive can be written. But a complete car philosophy is much harder to stop. If Mercedes have built performance into the way the engine works with the hybrid system, the way the energy is deployed, the way the aerodynamics stay stable, the way the tires come alive, and the way Antonelli feels confidence at the limit, then the FIA cannot remove that with one inspection. And neither can the rivals copy it overnight. That is what made Antonelli's Monaco pole feel so dangerous. It did not answer the question. It made the question bigger. Because the sport was no longer asking only whether Mercedes had used a controversial trick. It was asking whether the trick everyone noticed was just the easiest part of the Mercedes advantage to find. But the engine controversy was only the first spark. Once Mercedes stayed fast after the FIA changed the hot engine checks, the paddock did not relax. It did the opposite. It started looking at the rest of the car with more suspicion than before. Because when the most obvious explanation stops being enough, every small detail becomes more important. And that is exactly where the front wing entered the story. At first, it looked like a separate issue. Different race. Different part of the car. Different type of question. But in Formula 1, nothing stays separate for long, because a car is not a collection of parts. It is one connected system, where one small behavior can change everything behind it. The engine affects the speed. The speed affects the air. The air affects the wing. The wing affects the tires. The tires affect the driver's confidence. And in Monaco, confidence is not a detail. It is the difference between attacking the walls and fearing them. Earlier in the season, footage from the Chinese Grand Prix raised concerns about the Mercedes W17's front wing. Rival teams noticed that the flaps appeared to remain in an intermediate position under braking, not fully behaving the way they were expected to behave within the required closing window. To most fans, that sounds tiny. A flap moving slightly differently. A few milliseconds. A small piece of carbon fiber doing something unusual. But in Formula 1, that can be massive. The front wing is the first part of the car that meets the air. It decides where that air goes next. If the air is sent in a slightly different direction, the entire car behind it can feel different. Think of it like opening the first door in a crowded hallway. If that door opens straight, everyone moves one way. If it opens at a different angle, the entire crowd behind it shifts. That is what airflow does around a Formula 1 car. One small change at the front can influence the floor, the rear of the car, the tire grip, and the way the driver feels when he turns in. And that is why rivals cared. Because if the Mercedes front wing behaved differently under braking, it could have helped the car stay more stable at the exact moment the driver needed trust the most. Braking is not simply slowing down. Braking is violence. The car dives forward. The rear becomes lighter. The tires are loaded. The driver is asking the car to stop, rotate, and prepare for acceleration all at the same time. If the front of the car feels stable in that moment, the driver can brake later. Turn with more confidence. Carry a little more speed. Get back to throttle earlier. And those little moments become lap time. At Monaco, they become everything. Because Monaco does not reward drivers who wait. It rewards drivers who believe. A driver who hesitates loses time instantly. A driver who trusts the car can place it inches from the barrier, again and again, until the lap becomes something that looks almost impossible. That is what Antonelli did. He did not look like a teenager surviving Monaco. He looked like a driver who believed the car would obey him. That is why the front wing question mattered emotionally, not just technically. It connected directly to what people saw on track. Antonelli's calm. His commitment. His ability to attack a circuit that usually exposes fear. The FIA investigated the wing concern and cleared Mercedes. According to the source material, the behavior was not judged to be deliberate software manipulation. It was linked to insufficient hydraulic pressure, a design miscalculation that affected how the wing closed under certain air loads. No penalty came. No disqualification. No official ruling that the wing was being used illegally. But this is where the story becomes more complicated. Being cleared does not always remove suspicion. Sometimes it creates a different kind of suspicion. Because rivals now know the behavior was real enough to be questioned. They know the system was unusual enough to draw attention. And when a team is already under pressure for a controversial engine interpretation, even a cleared investigation becomes part of a larger pattern. That is how Formula One suspicion grows. Not always through one dramatic piece of evidence. Through accumulation. One strange detail. Then another. Then another. Until the paddock stops asking whether one system was illegal, and starts asking whether the entire car has been built around the gray areas. That is the phrase rivals fear. Gray areas. Because gray areas are not always cheating. They are not always clean either. They are the places where the rulebook is not as sharp as the engineers. The places where the intention of the rule and the wording of the rule do not perfectly match. Mercedes appeared to be living in those places. The engine controversy was about temperature. The front wing concern was about movement. And then the third layer was about timing. The hybrid qualifying trick. This one was even more alarming, because it moved the discussion from performance into safety. Under the new rules, cars had to reduce electrical energy deployment as they approached the timing line on a qualifying lap. In simple terms, the car could not keep using maximum electrical boost all the way to the end without a controlled reduction. Everyone was supposed to fade the power down. That was the idea. But Mercedes and Red Bull reportedly discovered a way to use an emergency shutdown function connected to the hybrid system. That function was designed for protection. For real problems. For moments when the system needed to shut down to avoid damage or danger. But according to the controversy, it could be used at the right moment during qualifying to avoid the normal reduction of electrical power for longer. An emergency feature became a performance tool. And that is where the line became very thin. Because the function existed legally. The car was capable of doing it. The software had a reason to be there. But the question was not only, can the car do this? The question was it supposed to be used like this? Imagine a race where every runner has to slow down before the finish line, but one runner finds an emergency gate that lets them keep sprinting for a few extra steps. The gate exists for safety. The runner did not invent the gate. But using it as part of the race changes the meaning of the rule. That is why the FIA had to step in. And the reason became even clearer in Japan. During the Japanese Grand Prix weekend, Antonelli and Max Verstappen both suffered dangerous power losses through corners. They were left moving slowly in high-speed sections while other cars were still approaching quickly behind them. Alexander Albon was also affected by complications connected to the same system. Suddenly, this was no longer just clever engineering. It was risk. A slow car in a fast corner is one of the most frightening situations in racing. The driver behind may not expect it. The closing speed can become huge. The driver with the problem has almost no power, almost no defense, and very little time to get out of the way. That kind of moment changes the conversation immediately. Ferrari raised safety concerns. The FIA issued a technical directive. Emergency shutdowns had to be used only for genuine emergencies. The system could not be used as a repeated performance shortcut. And Antonelli himself admitted the trick was not safe, while supporting the ban from a driver's safety point of view. That detail matters. Drivers protect speed fiercely. They do not normally welcome losing anything that can make a lap faster. So when a driver says a performance method is not safe, it means the risk was not theoretical. It was felt inside the cockpit. Now connect the three stories. A hot engine loophole that allegedly helped the car behave differently at racing temperature. A front wing question that involved unusual behavior under braking loads. A hybrid shutdown exploit that used an emergency function to protect qualifying power. Different systems. Same pattern. Mercedes kept appearing in the places where the rules were hardest to police. And that is why Antonelli's Monaco pole made the controversy explode. Because by Monaco, several doors had already been closed, or at least pushed shut.